Rain hammered the roof in uneven drumming, a relentless percussion that seemed to echo the pulse in her tiny, trembling body. She dragged herself across the
Poor
muddy
thing.
yard, limbs stiff and useless,
Don't be
her wet fur
afraid.
plastered to brittle bones.
Come inside
Each
from the
movement was a
rain.
whispered defiance against the world that had already written her off. Her eyes, wide and glimmering with desperation, caught the faint glow of a porch light in the distance, a fragile beacon slicing through the gray drizzle. Somewhere inside, the faint memory of warmth and safety flickered like a candle against the storm. The wind carried the scent of damp earth, wet leaves, and something faintly metallic. Blood, or rust, or both. She paused, ears twitching at the soft shuffle of footsteps behind a screened door, the creak of a rocking chair that rocked against loneliness. Time slowed as the realization hit she had found them. The elderly couple on the porch, strangers in one sense, but in another, the only hands, only hearts,
here, little
that
one.
could lift her from the shadows. And she moved, inch by inch, toward the promise of being seen, being saved. Rain fell in endless sheets, turning the narrow alley into a river of mud and debris. The wind tore at the edges of the buildings, rattling loose shutters and carrying the scent of wet earth and old refuse. Somewhere under that relentless downpour, a tiny figure moved, dragging itself along the slick stones. A puppy no larger than a loaf of bread, her fur plastered to fragile bones, struggled forward on limbs that refused to work as they should. Her back legs trembled uselessly, flopping in awkward stutters as she propelled herself with her front paws, claws scraping against the hard, cold concrete. Each movement was a battle, every inch a triumph, and yet the world offered no encouragement. The night pressed in around her, dark and indifferent, illuminated only by the occasional flash of lightning that cast long, skeletal shadows on the walls. Her eyes wide, glassy, alive with desperation, searched for something she could not name, a warmth, a presence, a hand that might lift her from this unforgiving world. The rain soaked her until the mud clung to her chest, turning her small form into a dark smear against the gray-black night. Her body shook partly from the cold, partly from effort, partly from fear, but she did not stop. She could not. Somewhere in the distance, a faint light glimmered through the rain. A porch lamp, dim and steady, cutting through the storm like a beacon. She blinked against the raindrops in her eyes and moved toward it, dragging herself over puddles that tried to steal her warmth, around fallen leaves that clung to her fur, over twisted bits of trash that snagged her claws. The wind carried distant sounds, an old radio humming somewhere, a dog barking far off, the quiet shuffle of human feet inside houses. She tilted her head, ears flicking, searching for the source of the life she sensed beyond the walls, and then crawled forward, inch by painful inch. Every breath was ragged, misting in the cold air. Her chest rose and fell with unnatural effort, her small tongue barely lapping at the rainwater collecting in puddles along the way. Pain radiated in sharp pulses through her back, but she bit down on it, teeth clenched against her own body's betrayal. She remembered, somehow, the scent of warmth, milk, wood smoke, something comforting and safe, and she willed herself toward it. It was the only thought that kept her moving when her body screamed to stop, when the mud pulled at her fur, when the wind tore at her ears and eyes. The porch light grew brighter, the outlines of a house emerging through the haze. She saw shadows behind the curtain, the faint outline of human figures moving with slowness, their presence calm and grounding. The puppy paused, trembling in the storm, ears flattening as fear and hope warred inside her. The humans had not seen her yet. Could they see her? Would they care? Her gaze caught a flicker of movement, something gentle, unthreatening, and she pushed herself forward again, each front paw leaving a small smear in the mud, her body crawling on sheer willpower. The rain began to sting, but her eyes never left the faint glow of the porch light. A gust of wind whipped her sideways, knocking her onto her side in the mud, and for a moment she froze, shivering violently, her tiny body nearly giving in. But instinct, or maybe desperation, drove her back to her paws. Her breathing came in sharp, uneven bursts. She tried to steady it, chest heaving, limbs trembling, each drag forward a monumental act of defiance. The shadows inside the house shifted again, and she saw the door open, a pair of elderly hands reaching out instinctively. It was enough. Something deep inside her stirred, a mixture of hope and relief, and she gave what little strength remained, propelling herself forward over the final stretch of slick grass. Her nails scraped against the porch steps as she dragged herself upward, slipping more than once, but never letting go of the faint, glowing promise of sanctuary. Her small body trembled violently, soaked to the bone, shaking from exhaustion, cold, and pain. And yet, inch by inch, she crossed the threshold into warmth, into safety, into the unknown hands that might save her. The elderly couple crouched low, their faces etched with surprise, concern, and immediate compassion. She froze for a heartbeat, unsure of their intentions, body stiff with exhaustion and fear, but their voices were soft, gentle, coaxing without pressure. A hand, warm, lined, strong yet careful, stroked her wet fur. The puppy shivered, not entirely from cold, but from the overwhelming realization that she had been seen. She had not been abandoned, not entirely. And then, slowly, tremblingly, she allowed herself to be lifted into warmth, into a quilt-swathed embrace, ears flattening against the gentle pressure of human palms. The storm continued outside, but inside, there was a quiet, soft light that enveloped her. She nestled against the couple's hands, shivering into their touch, the first moments of trust creeping into her small, battered heart. For the first time, she did not struggle. For the first time, the world did not feel completely cruel. Her eyes, still wide, began to relax ever so slightly, as if absorbing the strange, foreign sensation of care. The rain continued to pound, the wind continued to howl, and the night remained indifferent. But she was no longer entirely alone. She had made it through the storm, and in doing so, she had discovered a fragile, tentative lifeline, a pair of elderly hands, a soft voice, a warm presence that would not let her go. And in that quiet, suspended moment, soaked and trembling, the puppy's tiny heart beat steadily for the first time in what felt like forever. The world could wait. She had found her sanctuary. The warmth hit her like a wave, unfamiliar and disorienting, seeping into her wet, shivering body. She had never known warmth like this, not the stormy, cold rain, not the cramped, dark corners she'd dragged herself through. She quivered in the quilt, tiny teeth chattering, heart hammering against ribs that felt too fragile for her struggle. The couple knelt before her, their movements slow and careful, as if aware that any sudden motion might undo the fragile trust she was beginning to build. The woman's hand hovered for a heartbeat before settling gently on her soaked fur, warmth radiating from fingers worn with age, knuckles pale beneath thin skin. The puppy pressed her nose against the hand instinctively, sniffing the faint scent of lavender and soap, something calm and human. She hesitated, then slowly allowed herself to be stroked, the trembling of her body softening slightly. Her back legs twitched uselessly beneath her, but the front paws found leverage in the quilt, digging in softly as if testing the solidity of this new world. The man joined in, his hands large and reassuring, cupping her small form with the gentleness of someone who had learned patience in long years. "It's okay, little one," he murmured, voice low, rough with emotion and age. "You're safe now. We won't let anything happen to you." The puppy's ears flicked back, uncertainty warring with a cautious hope. She had learned the world could be cruel, that hands often hurt instead of comforted. Yet there was something in their energy, a slow, steady rhythm, that mirrored the pulse in her own body, something grounding, something she could trust. The couple worked together, lifting her into their laps, wrapping her carefully in dry towels, and then a quilt that smelled faintly of home and hearth. She had never known gentleness like this. Never experienced the luxury of warmth that wasn't fleeting, never been held without fear of harm. She pressed her small head into the woman's chest, body trembling from both cold and the overwhelming flood of relief, and for the first time she allowed a soft whimper to escape. It was not a cry of panic or pain, but a sigh of recognition. This was safety, and she could finally let herself feel it. The elderly woman whispered soft reassurances, the kind that seep into the bones, filling emptiness with quiet certainty. She stroked the puppy's ears, ran a hand along her tiny back, whispering, "You're going to be okay. We'll take care of you. You won't be alone again." Each word pressed into the puppy's heart, and though her body still shivered, something inside her unclenched. For the first time in her short, battered life, she allowed herself to imagine a world where she would not be crawling alone through mud, where someone would respond to her needs without hesitation, without judgment, without cruelty. The man adjusted the quilt, cradling her as she nestled against him, her paws kneading instinctively at the folds of fabric. She had learned to survive with her body alone. But here she discovered the strange comfort of being supported, of having weight lifted from her, if only for a moment. The quiet presence of the couple, the soft hum of their voices, the faint scent of home, created a cocoon around her small, fragile frame. She blinked slowly, overwhelmed by the sensation, and allowed herself to rest her head on their joined hands. Outside, the storm continued to lash against the windows, but inside, the world contracted to this small, warm space. Every drop of rain became distant, irrelevant. Every gust of wind outside was muted by the walls, by the quilt, by the couple's presence. The puppy's body, stiff and sore from months of struggle, began to loosen incrementally. Tiny, almost imperceptible sighs of relief escaped her, as if she were shedding not only wetness and cold, but years of fear and exhaustion. The woman picked up a shallow bowl and poured warm water into it, the scent unfamiliar yet comforting. She lowered it to the puppy's lips, and after a tentative pause, the tiny tongue flicked out to lap at the liquid. The warmth of sustenance, the first real nourishment she had in what felt like an eternity, coursed through her, grounding her further in the safety of this home. She drank carefully, aware of hands near her, aware that no one would strike, that no one would force her to move faster than she could manage. The couple exchanged glances, soft smiles breaking across their faces. They had seen suffering before, yes, but there was something profoundly humbling in the presence of such raw, unfiltered need. The puppy was small, vulnerable, yet there was a strength, an undeniable will in her eyes. She had chosen them, and in doing so, she had given them purpose anew. They whispered to each other about blankets, warmth, vet visits, and care, their voices low, deliberate, infused with tenderness. And through it all the puppy listened, soaking in each syllable, each motion, each breath of human attention as though it were life itself. Night deepened outside, the storm finally easing into a soft drizzle, the occasional clap of distant thunder echoing faintly against the walls. Inside, the couple remained seated on the couch, the puppy nestled between them, small paws twitching, tiny heart racing but no longer with fear. She lifted her head, pressing her nose into the quilt, eyes half closed, letting herself simply exist in this unprecedented safety. Her body relaxed in ways she had never known were possible. For the first time, she did not fight the world. She allowed herself to feel it fully, profoundly, and without expectation of cruelty. As the minutes stretched into hours, she shifted slightly, finding a comfortable spot against the woman's chest, and then the man's hand rested lightly atop her back. She whimpered softly again, a sound that was no longer of panic, but of acknowledgement, a recognition that her small, battered body had found sanctuary. The world outside, the storm, the mud, the struggle, faded to irrelevance. Here there was only warmth, only care, only the quiet, steady rhythm of two lives attuned to hers. By the time the couple finally stood, adjusting blankets and drying towels, the puppy's small frame had begun to uncoil, tension easing from shoulders, neck, and spine. She lifted her head slowly, ears flicking forward, eyes meeting theirs with a tentative, fragile trust that was miraculous in its infancy. The couple smiled, whispers of reassurance spilling between them, and she responded, ever so slightly, with a soft nuzzle, a gentle paw pressing into their hands. In that quiet, trembling embrace, the first chapter of her new life had begun. She was still small, still fragile, still worn by the world. But she had discovered the first flicker of something new: trust, warmth, and the unspoken promise that she would never have to fight alone again. Morning arrived slowly, pale light slipping through rain-streaked windows, illuminating the cozy living room in a soft, tentative glow. The puppy stirred beneath the quilt, small body still trembling from the lingering chill, but her eyes were wide, alert, and filled with a fragile curiosity. The world beyond the house no longer seemed menacing. It was distant, muffled, irrelevant. Here, she had discovered warmth, presence, and the gentle rhythm of lives attuned to her fragile needs. She lifted her head, ears twitching, nose catching scents that spoke of home, wood polish, faint traces of breakfast, and the comforting smell of human skin. The quilt cradled her like a nest, and the couple's hands rested near her, soothing and steady. She tested her front paws on the soft rug, dragging herself forward with slow, deliberate effort. Each movement was exhausting, but she felt a strange strength coursing through her chest. For the first time, survival did not feel like an endless struggle. It was as if the quilt, the hands, the voices around her, had imbued her with the courage to explore her new world. The elderly woman leaned down, whispering encouragements, her hand tracing gentle circles over the puppy's damp fur. "That's it, little one," she murmured. "You're safe. You can do this." The man joined them, kneeling beside the puppy with a small bowl of warm water and soft food. The smell made her nose twitch involuntarily, and she inched closer, body taut with cautious excitement. She sniffed, then licked, then took a hesitant bite, the sensation of nourishment spreading warmth through her tiny body. Every swallow felt like a triumph, every sip a reclaiming of a life she had thought lost. The couple watched her, hearts swelling, sharing quiet smiles that spoke of love without expectation. She responded in small ways, lifting her head, a faint tail wag, a tentative whimper that seemed to say, "I am here. I am alive." They cleared a corner of the living room, arranging pillows and blankets into a makeshift nest. The puppy crawled into it, pressing her small body against the soft layers. Her hind legs twitched spasmodically, reminders of weakness, but her front paws kneaded the blankets instinctively, a physical echo of the instinct to survive and adapt. The couple observed quietly, learning her rhythms, her limits, and the subtle cues that told them when she was tired or hungry, when she needed comfort or space. As hours passed, the puppy began to explore her sanctuary. She inched across the rug, dragging her back legs with effort, but each successful movement brought a spark of pride to her tiny eyes. The couple whispered to one another, marveling at her determination, at the sheer will of this small creature to claim life even after enduring so much. They adjusted the pillows, moved a chair to give her more space, and spoke softly of possible future care, vet visits, and ways to strengthen her body. It was a slow, deliberate process, each step measured, tender, and filled with reverence for the tiny life in their care. The puppy's small body responded to love and patience in ways they could not have predicted. Her breathing eased, muscles slowly loosening as the warmth of the room and the attentiveness of her caregivers seeped into her. She discovered textures, the soft rug under her paws, the smooth wood of the coffee table she could barely reach, the quilt that smelled of home. Every new sensation was met with a tentative sniff, a careful paw test, and then a quiet sigh of satisfaction as she realized these things were safe, welcoming hers. By midday, sunlight filtered fully through the windows, painting golden streaks across the floor. The puppy, nestled between the couple's knees, lifted her head and tilted it curiously at a bird tapping against the window. She wagged her tiny tail, a flicker of joy that was new, unpracticed, but undeniable. The couple laughed softly, the sound filling the room with warmth. They had not just saved her from the storm, they were giving her a life that had been unimaginable just 24 hours before. The day was filled with small victories. A tiny bark escaped her throat as she discovered the sensation of play, a wobbly paw batting at a loose string on the quilt. She squeaked in delight, rolling slightly, her body uncoordinated but eager. The couple clapped quietly, encouraging without overwhelming her. Each new movement, each new sound, each exploration was a declaration. She belonged here, she was seen, she was loved. The world outside could rage and batter, but inside there was safety, warmth, and the unspoken promise that she would never be left to fight alone again. Evening descended with a gentle quiet, the room bathed in the fading glow of sunset. The puppy, exhausted from her efforts, nestled fully into the quilt, front paws tucked under her chin. The couple leaned close, hands resting gently over her small body, feeling the slow, steady pulse of life that had once been so fragile. The puppy lifted her eyes, meeting theirs with recognition, trust, and a tiny spark of affection. She whined softly, a sound that spoke of gratitude, relief, and the tentative beginnings of love. In that quiet room, with shadows stretching across walls and the faint smell of evening settling into the corners, the puppy understood something new. Life was no longer just survival. It was warmth, touch, nourishment, and care. It was being noticed, being held, being loved. And as she drifted into a light sleep, head resting against the couple's hands, her tiny chest rising and falling in calm rhythm, the first chapter of growth had begun. She was no longer just a survivor of storms, she was a creature capable of hope, of trust, of home. The couple watched her, their eyes soft with wonder and reverence. They had not expected to find such fragile courage, such stubborn life, such instantaneous connection. And yet, here she was, proof that even the smallest, most vulnerable creatures could teach the most profound lessons of resilience, love, and belonging. Outside, the world continued, indifferent and vast, but inside this small living room, with quilted nests and human hearts leaning close, the puppy had discovered her first true home. The nights were the hardest. Outside, the world was dark, indifferent, and unpredictable, but inside, the house had become a sanctuary of quiet vigilance. The puppy, now a small bundle of fur and fragile hope, trembled intermittently, her back legs twitching in spasms that stole her rest. The couple had learned to recognize the subtle cues of pain and feared a whimper, a slight arching of her spine. the twitching of her small paws. Each episode pulled at their hearts, leaving their own sleep broken and fragmented, but they never left her side. The woman would sit on the edge of the bed or the couch, one hand stroking her damp, trembling fur, whispering soft encouragements that seemed to wrap around her tiny body like armor. The man adjusted blankets, placed a warm compress on her hindquarters, and murmured reassurances that she could not yet understand, but that resonated nonetheless. The puppy's body shivered violently with each spasm, each bout of pain. Yet she never cried out in panic. She had learned that these hands, these voices, would not abandon her, that they were as steady and unwavering as the quilt that cradled her small body. Vet visits became a new rhythm of life, each one a mixture of dread and cautious optimism. The puppy would shiver in the carrier, small body pressed against the quilt, eyes wide and untrusting at first. But the couple's presence calmed her, hands stroking her ears, whispering, "It's okay, little one. We're here." She learned slowly that these trips, though frightening, were steps toward a stronger, safer existence. The needle, the examination table, the strange smells and sounds, all became part of the narrative of care, rather than punishment. Each return home, wrapped once more in warmth and soft blankets, was a reinforcement of trust and resilience. Even within the house, challenges persisted. Food had to be carefully measured, moved closer to her paws so she could reach it. Blankets were rearranged multiple times a day to accommodate the twitching of her back legs and the stiffness of her joints. The couple observed meticulously, noting her reactions, adjusting care routines, anticipating her needs before she could even signal them. Their lives were now entirely interwoven with hers, every breath and movement synchronized to ensure her survival and comfort. One evening, after a particularly long day of spasms and vet appointments, the puppy lay in her nest, chest heaving from exhaustion, eyes half closed. The woman leaned close, running her fingers along the contours of her small body, whispering a litany of calm words, stories of the past and promises for the future. The puppy's ears twitched at the familiar cadence, her tiny body beginning to relax despite the lingering ache in her hind legs. The man joined, placing his hand gently on her side, and together they formed a protective, comforting circle around her fragile form. Progress was slow, imperceptible at times, yet undeniable. Tiny victories emerged in the form of small movements, a front paw lifted purposefully, a short crawl across the rug, a faint squeak of playful interest in a dangling string. Each success brought a rush of pride and relief to the couple's hearts. They celebrated quietly, whispering encouragement, careful not to overwhelm her with the weight of their own emotions. The puppy responded in kind, pushing against their hands, pressing her nose into the warmth of their palms, and offering the occasional soft bark that resonated like a tiny trumpet of defiance and hope. Yet shadows loomed. There were nights when her body shook uncontrollably, and she whimpered in fear, unable to move her back legs, trapped in pain and panic. The couple stayed awake with her hands never leaving, murmuring, rocking slightly to ease her trembling. The room smelled faintly of lavender, blankets, and the subtle tang of antiseptic from recent vet care. Yet it was no longer foreign to her. It was a place of endurance, of patience, of love that refused to abandon her. She had learned to rely on them, and in doing so, she was learning the impossible truth: life could be sustained even when shadows pressed close. Gradually, the puppy began to explore her nest with more confidence. She inched along the edges of blankets, shifted her weight with front paws, and learned to maneuver around small obstacles. The couple observed every twitch, every movement, and adjusted their care with painstaking precision. They celebrated milestones quietly: her first crawl across the room without assistance, the faintest attempt to balance her back legs, the moment her tiny head lifted proudly to meet their eyes. Each action, no matter how small, was a triumph, a defiance of the limitations her body had once imposed. Through this, the bond between them deepened. The puppy began to recognize the cadence of their steps, the softness of their voices, the weight of their hands against her tiny frame. She would nuzzle into them when she sensed fatigue, tilt her head toward their whispers of encouragement, and sometimes, when the moment felt safe, offer a tiny wag of her tail. The elderly couple, in turn, learned to read her subtle cues: the flicker of her ears, the small arch of her back, the tremble in her paws. Their lives had become a delicate choreography of care, patience, and love, and in this dance, the puppy began to reclaim the life she had nearly lost. One particularly quiet night, after a day of small victories and setbacks, the puppy curled fully into the woman's lap, warm and tired. The man rested his hand on her back, fingers tracing along her tiny spine. They whispered softly to one another, recounting her progress, acknowledging her strength, and imagining the days ahead. The puppy, in the stillness of the moment, allowed herself to feel something she had never known: safety, trust, and the quiet, powerful pulse of home. The storm outside had long since passed, leaving only the faint hum of distant wind against the house. But inside, the room was alive with the soft rhythm of breath and heartbeat, a cocoon of resilience and care. The shadows that had once haunted her movements now seemed distant, muted by warmth, vigilance, and unwavering love. And in that quiet, steady heartbeat, the puppy discovered a new truth: life could be reclaimed, strength could be nurtured, and even the smallest, most fragile beings could rise against the darkness. Sunlight filtered softly through the curtains, painting golden stripes across the quilt where the puppy lay nestled between the elderly couple. Her small body, once trembling and fragile, now seemed lighter, strengthened by months of patience, care, and love. Her hind legs still carried the memory of weakness, but each movement had become more confident, more deliberate. She stretched her front paws slowly, ears twitching as she took in the familiar sense of home. The warmth of the quilt, the faint aroma of breakfast, the comforting presence of human hands that had never left her side. The couple watched quietly, hearts brimming with awe and relief. Their lives had been irrevocably intertwined with this small creature, her struggles and triumphs etched into every fiber of their daily existence. They had witnessed the tremors of pain, the hesitant attempts to move, the tiny victories that spoke of courage beyond what her small body suggested. And now, in the golden light of morning, the proof of resilience was undeniable. The puppy lifted her head and tilted it, noticing a small sunbeam on the floor. A flicker of determination crossed her features, a subtle but unmistakable spark of joy. With painstaking effort, she dragged herself forward, front paws working in perfect rhythm, hind legs following with careful, almost miraculous twitches. She paused halfway, trembling, then pressed on, guided by the gentle encouragements of the couple. "That's it, little one," the woman whispered, voice soft but firm. "You're stronger than you know." The man nodded, hand resting lightly on her back. "Keep going, we're with you." The puppy reached the sunbeam, pressing her tiny body into the warmth. She paused, chest heaving with effort, then lifted her head to meet their eyes. Something unspoken passed between them, a quiet acknowledgement of survival, of shared struggle, of the bond that had carried them all through the darkest nights. A small tail wag followed, tentative at first, then a little more assured, a tiny celebration of life, of trust, of love earned and returned. Outside, birds chirped, the world carrying on as it always had. But inside the living room, time seemed suspended, caught in the delicate interplay of presence, attention, and quiet triumph. The couple smiled at one another, a mixture of tears and laughter pooling in their eyes, and the puppy responded with soft, eager nuzzles, pressing her tiny nose against their palms, as if to say, "I remember you. I trust you. I belong here." The weeks that followed were filled with a rhythm of growth and connection. She learned to navigate the room with increasing independence, tiny wobbles turning into short crawls into confident scoots. She discovered toys and soft squeaks, the texture of rugs and cushions, the joy of chasing shadows of light across the floor. Each new discovery was met with gentle encouragement, soothing hands, and whispered praise. The couple reveled in her victories, not just for what they represented physically, but for the reclaiming of life, the triumph of spirit over fragility. One afternoon, the woman sat on the couch with the puppy in her lap, soft sunlight filtering through the windows. She ran her hands through the small tuft of fur atop the puppy's head, whispering stories of the world beyond the porch, tales of resilience and love. The puppy tilted her head, eyes half closed in trust, leaning into every word, every touch. She had learned that hands could heal, voices could soothe, and that her existence mattered. Not for what she could do, but for who she was: small, fragile, yet indomitable. The man watched from across the room, hand resting on the quilt, feeling the subtle rise and fall of her chest, the steady rhythm of life that had once seemed so precarious. He marveled at the tiny movements of her paws, the faint bark that occasionally escaped her, the way her eyes followed him with recognition and trust. She had transformed not only physically, but emotionally, spiritually, into a creature capable of love, hope, and connection. And in this transformation, he and his wife had been transformed as well, learning patience, resilience, and the profound power of unwavering care. Even the shelter staff, who had first seen her trembling and paralyzed, were moved when they were shown photos and videos of her progress. They had witnessed despair, fragility, and survival, and now they saw triumph. The puppy, once the subject of fear and hopelessness, had become a beacon of the extraordinary impact of love and dedication. Her journey from the storm-soaked alley to the warmth of the couple's home was not just a story of recovery, but a testament to the enduring truth that care, patience, and presence could rewrite the harshest beginnings. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the room in amber light, the puppy crawled to the woman's lap and rested her head against her chest. The man rested a hand gently on her back, feeling the warmth of life, the tiny heartbeat that had once been so fragile, now strong and steady. The puppy closed her eyes, ears flicking occasionally, and let herself feel the depth of safety and love surrounding her. She had endured storms, pain, and fear, but now, nestled between the two humans who had chosen her, she allowed herself to simply exist, fully and completely. The couple exchanged a look, eyes glistening with tears that spoke of love, pride, and quiet relief. The puppy stirred, lifting her tiny head and offering a faint lick to the woman's hand, then the man's. It was a gesture of recognition, of gratitude, of belonging. She remembered everything: the storm, the struggle, the pain, and yet she had risen above it, guided by the steadfast presence of hands and hearts that refused to let her go. As night fell, the room glowed softly with lamplight. The quilt wrapped around her tiny body, and the couple leaned close, foreheads touching hers gently, sharing a moment of profound connection. In the hush of evening, she whimpered softly, not out of fear, but in acknowledgement of the journey she had endured and the love she had found. Outside, the world continued its indifferent rhythm, but inside this living room, a fragile, resilient life had been reclaimed, nurtured, and cherished. The puppy raised her head one last time, eyes meeting the couple's with a spark of understanding and love that words could never capture. In that quiet, suspended heartbeat, the storm, the struggle, and the pain dissolved entirely. The world could wait. She had been saved, she had been seen, she had been loved. And in that moment, the heart remembered life, no matter how fragile, could always be redeemed.